With this Shabbat, Shabbat Balak, we move into a portion of the book of Numbers that contains an isolated story of the Moabite king Balak and the prophet for hire, Balaam, or Balaam, as is commonly known. And so I've decided to entitle my Devar Torah this evening, Balaam, a reluctant prophet, or a not-for-profit prophet. I couldn't help that, I'm sorry. I just couldn't resist. Now, this portion actually recounts the story of two prophets. One is Balaam, and the other is his donkey. Now, although the story of the donkey is way more interesting, as the kids say, I'm going to focus on his master, the prophet Balaam, instead. Maybe next year when this portion comes around, we'll spend time on his donkey. There's something unique about this particular prophet, besides the fact that he's not Jewish. Although Balaam hires out as his professional services of blessings and curses, for this event, Balaam refuses any financial pay at all. At first, Balaam refuses the job when he is instructed by God, who says, "You shall not go with them, you shall not curse the people, for they are blessed." Well, not to be deterred, the king, Balak, tries again. Something interesting now occurs. Balaam says that the silver or gold with which the king might reward him has no bearing upon whether or not he blesses or curses the Israelites. His words will be that of God's. He will be powerless to say anything else. Well, according to the Torah, Balaam states, "Though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not do anything big or little, contrary to the command of the Lord my God." Well, with this, Balaam agrees to return to Moab with the king's representatives to journey to the border in order to view the Israelites. 3 separate times Balak shows a portion of the Israelites to Balaam, and 3 separate times Balak demands a curse, and 3 separate times Balaam offers a blessing instead of a curse. Well, after the third blessing, Balak is beside himself with rage. Clapping his hands together, he orders Balaam to return to his people and informs him that he's not going to get paid. Balaam simply reminds Balak that he wasn't in hire in the first place, and repeats the same words that he had told his representative. No matter how much silver or gold is offered, the only words that I can offer are those that are directed by God. So, thus, before leaving, Balaam turns the tables on the king, Balak, by offering the very curse upon him that Balak wanted against the Israelites. Well, what is interesting in all of this is the lack of zeal and passion that Balaam throughout the ordeal. Usually, Balaam blesses, he curses, and then he gets paid. Perhaps he consults with God, or perhaps maybe even with many gods. Perhaps he just speaks the words that he is hired to utter. Except this time, God is in control, not Balaam, and certainly not the Moabite king Balak. For once, this prophet for hire, as the title says, became a not-for-profit prophet. If this was the end of the story, we'd all go home humming the now famous words of Balaam's blessing. Ma tovu ohai lecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. Of course, that's just only one of many melodies for that. How great are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. But the story takes a dramatic twist. One minute the Israelites are being blessed, and the very next moment they participate in such ungodly actions that so enrage God that he commands Moses to round up the ringleaders and have them publicly impaled, so that, according to the Torah, the Lord's wrath may turn away from Israel. Well then, just as we are recovering from this shocking event, a certain Israelite named Zimri steps up in front of God and everyone, literally, and takes a Midianite woman into his tent. This violation so enrages one man named Pinchas, or Phinehas, that he rushes after them and impales them both with his spear. It is in the concluding 9 verses of the portion Balak that we have this confusing and often misinterpreted story of this zealous Israelite named Pinchas. Now, picture, if you will, this scene. A lovely valley where the Israelites are serenely encamped. In the middle of the camp, you can see not only the lazy smoke of their campfires, but the pillar of smoke by day and the pillar of fire by night, causing the very air around it to shimmer and glow, revealing to the Israelites that God's eternal presence is in their midst. Adonai has taken special care not only to bring the Israelites out of each Egyptian bondage, but to protect them all along the way, providing for their every need. So, how do we show our respect and loyalty to God? Of course, by turning away and following after the local deity. This case is Baal Peor. And now comes the part which I find so disturbing. The Torah continues by stating, "Just then, one of the Israelites came and brought a Midianite woman over to his companions, in the sight of Moses and the whole Israelite community, who were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, or Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, saw this, he left the assembly and, taking a spear in his hand, he followed the Israelite into the chamber and stabbed both of them, the Israelite and the woman, through the belly. Then the plague against the Israelites was checked. Those who died of the plague numbered 24,000. I wrestle with that text. So why do I find this so disturbing? Because of the violence? Well, of course. Both the violence of Pinchas and also the violence attributed to God through the plague. But I am also concerned by the influence these words have on those individuals who, like Pinchas, are zealous for the Lord and respond with a focused violence which leaves no room for differing opinions. Adonai is so happy with Pinchas and his zeal that God establishes with him and his descendants Briti Shalom, my covenant of peace, or as it is also translated, a complete and perfect peace, perfect covenant. That is really a very powerful concept. Imagine how that would sound to someone who believes that they know what God wants and are willing to use violence in any form to bring about those results. Sounds frightening, doesn't it? And it sounds all too familiar as well. Until recently, Judaism has always viewed this event by Pinchas through the lens of moderation. Tradition interprets this story as one which impels us to take immediate action against injustice. The rabbis even went so far as to criticize Moses because he merely stood by, thus prompting Pinchas to take up the sword. But the rabbis were also aware that Moses' wife, Zipporah, was also a Midianite, although not part of that group of women causing the Israelites men to abandon Adonai. But thus the focus was moderation. Well, today, the lens through which these words are viewed in some Jewish circles has become distorted. There are small groups of militant Orthodox extremists who use this story from the Torah as proof that God expects them to take violent action against Palestinian Arabs in the West Bank and Gaza. Now, the purpose of this Devar Torah is not to place blame or responsibility on one side or another in the terrible mess we call the Middle East peace process. However, I cannot help but be frightened when fellow Jews quote words of Torah as they perform acts of terrorism. This story, Pinchas, became the basis for the Jewish physician, Dr. Baruch Goldstein, to abandon the medical oath he took in America, do no harm, and according to the news reports of the time, to, quote, walk into a mosque and with an automatic weapon open fire on praying Muslims in the West Bank city of the Tomb of the Patriarchs, a shrine sacred to both Muslims and Jews. Israeli extremists continue to pay homage to his grave in the nearby Jewish settlement of Kiryat Arba, where a marble plaque reads, "To the holy Baruch Goldstein, who gave his life for the Jewish people, the Torah, and the name of Israel." Well, so are these the actions or the rantings of a few angry Jewish individuals? No. Each side of the Palestinian-Israeli turmoil has its supporters and perpetrators of violence. The tragic loss of life is all too real, occurring all too often. The issues are complicated and convoluted. Well, on this Shabbat, we have choices to make. When we read the story of Pinchas, are we going to be guided by his zeal to impale with a mighty spear those we perceive to be in violation of God's law? We've seen how these words have become distorted in some circles today, not only in Israel, but around the world. For me, I choose to focus on the blessing in this portion by Balaam. How goodly are your tents. When we think about it, our actions, our future is in our hands. We can choose to bless and we can choose to curse. We can act as a blessing, or we could act as a curse. We can choose to stand idly by when we see acts of injustice being committed around us, or we can do as all of us have done to make a conscious effort to bring peace into that small corner of the world in which we live. Will this heal the world? Well, no, not by itself. But as Jews, we live our lives in concert with others, and it is through our combined efforts that we bring about change. Our covenant with God is one which says we will actively participate in tikkun olam, repairing of this broken world. That means that we are, as the rabbis have said so many times, God's hands in bringing healing to this world. That is the real meaning of this story. In line with Bilam's blessings, perhaps we can ask ourselves on this Shabbat, Atovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, and your dwelling places, O Israel. Well, perhaps we should rephrase this statement into a question by asking ourselves, how goodly are our tents, O Temple Israel? I think we can say pretty darn good. Shabbat Shalom.